Doug, yeah.
I actually agree with everything Keeley just said. I believe that grace without holiness and wrath makes no sense, and if God were wrathful only, we'd all be sunk, we'd all be lost. If God were gracious only, we'd all be sunk in another way, because he would not be good. It would turn heaven into hell and hell into heaven. So the best way I know to represent this is to people like Cass, is I believe that the ultimate we can't see God in his transcendence. If we want to see God, we have to look at him through Jesus. And the best way to look at the marriage of love and wrath is to look at the cross of Jesus Christ. When Jesus was dying on the cross, we see there the most perfect expression of love that was ever exhibited on this planet. And we see also the most perfect expression of wrath that was ever exhibited on this planet. Because Jesus was dying there, twisted, nailed to a cross because of my sin. So I see God's wrath and I see God's love.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Keeley, I want to go on to another call, if that's okay. We have a caller on line 1. And hello, this is Radio Free Moscow. You're on the air.
Hey, this is Lee, and this is for Doug. You recently counseled a serial child molester who was later convicted, who is an NSA student and turned himself in. And I'm wondering, did you not tell the community, let alone your congregation, that a serial pedophilia molester was loose while awaiting trial, who could drive from Colville, Washington, and your reason for not telling the community or your congregation was that that he was in Colville, Washington, and he was far away? Do you think that's the sheriff's or the local media's job to tell the community about that, or was that a lapse in pastoral responsibility?
Okay, Lee, we're talking, it sounds like about 6 different questions. Let's take one at a time. First question for Doug, and we'll proceed on to the rest of the questions.
I think I can answer them all.
Okay, you want to go ahead and tackle all?
Just
okay, and you hang on, Lee, to see if we cover the issues, okay?
Here's the basic scenario. The young man that was in question did not turn himself in. He was caught. When he was caught, and as soon as he acknowledged the justice of what happened, he was expelled from NSA. He, within a very short space of time, returned to his home in Colville, Washington. At that time, he was under constant supervision by his parents. He went home with his parents. He was under constant supervision. As soon as we found out about it, he was turned into the authorities at Latah County within a matter of hours. Once he was out of town and turned into the authorities within a matter of hours, the civil authorities made the arrangements for him being loose or not up to his trial. That was not up to us. But because I knew that he would only come down to Moscow for counseling accompanied by his parents. He was never in Moscow by himself unsupervised. He was up in Colville. The authorities knew where he was. Everything was fine as far as that was concerned. Everybody who needed to know knew. We had absolutely no reason to believe that he posed any threat to anybody here. I worked closely with the pastor of his home church, who is a friend of mine. I worked closely with him, and that church notified the people there right away because he was living there. It was a practical issue for them. He wasn't physically here. As soon as it became apparent that he might wind up physically here, we notified our congregation. So I don't believe that things like this are always areas where you can second guess whether you did everything just right or perfectly. But I believe that we pursued that conscientiously, and it was a sort of a by-the-book cooperative effort between a pastoral counseling and the legal authorities. I believe that we did right by our congregation, did right by the Moscow community, did right by the Colville community, and I'm glad that the young man is in jail now, where I visit him.
Okay,
I want to ask about the perceived vision of gender roles among New St. Andrews and Christ Church followers, that young girls should be...
Lee, can I interrupt you for just 1 second?
Yeah.
The format that we're using is before going on to another meaty subject like you're bringing up. In fact, that was a subject I'm glad you called, because that's another subject of patriarchal belief system that I wanted to talk about. So you've brought the subject up, but before we go on to that, I want Keeley to have an opportunity to respond to Doug's remarks. That's the protocol we're following tonight. So hang on with us, and we'll get to that subject right after Keeley has an opportunity to reply.
Thanks, Steve. There are a few things I want to say. It may very well be, and in fact it appears, that Doug Wilson did everything that he was legally and ethically charged to do when he heard about this young man's activities and his horrible and gross offenses against a family, a child of a family in his church. It may very well be, and in fact appears, that what happened is that he did what he needed to do to prevent future abuse. And for that, we should all be grateful, although I would think that any one of us would do that. Where I have a problem is I am not sure that if he found out about this in the spring of '05 and didn't bring it to the Christchurch Heads of Household meetings until the winter of '05. Heads of household meetings, by the way, are attended only by male heads of households or female heads of households. There are very, very few female heads of households. I think he did not do everything in his power to uncover past abuse. I bitterly resent that only male heads of households, predominantly in parish meetings with or without the young man's name. He seems unable to tell us for sure that the young man's name was mentioned in all of the parish meetings to the male heads of households.
It was in the minutes. His name was...
You've not wanted to forward copies of the minutes, and some people swear that they did not hear his name. Either way, mothers whose husbands were attending the heads of household meetings did not get the information. I think that when you let that many months go by, and the young man molested children as young as 2, mothers are owed that information on the same level, at the same time, with the same degree of respect and accountability as fathers, perhaps even more so, because they're usually the ones who do the bathing and the potty training and might notice some things that might be amiss. Further, I don't understand why it's necessary to be part of the inner circle of Christ Church to hear news of what may have happened, so that things can be uncovered and regressive behavior, bedwetting, crying, injuries that are unexplained might then be put into some context. When you wait for a few months, it's not very easy sometimes to uncover further incidents of abuse. I also bitterly object to your saying in the paper that the problem here is that the liberals and the sodomites are ganging up on you again, and that's really what the issue is. Your attempts to distance yourself from Mr. Sittler are lamentable. When people said, well, he was a member of Christ Church, and you said, no, he wasn't, do you really think that what people were saying was he went through a specific ordinance of membership required by all CREC churches, and that's really what they meant? Or do you think that what they meant was, hey, he worships at Christ Church, he goes to NSA, he lives in a boarding house with Christ Church families, it was at a Christ Church family that he offended and was caught, he is receiving counsel from you as his pastor? It's those kind of, frankly, that kind of obfuscation that makes it very, very difficult to just assume right off the bat that you have done the most ethical thing. I applaud you.
Okay, Keeley, I'm going to step in as moderator here again. And Doug, there's a lot of knives going in your directions. I'm going to give you just a couple of minutes to reply to all of this, and then I want to go ahead and take the caller's second question, since it is an important issue that we need to go into. Are you still with us, Lee?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Doug.
First, I appreciate the extent to which Keeley is willing to say that we did what we could to protect everybody involved from any future instance of it, and we took that action right away. And when you're trying to uncover a mess, which is what a pattern and a lifetime of deceptiveness creates, when you have sneaking around and that sort of thing, you don't know, you have to make judgment calls on, do I make an announcement to the whole church? Do we make an announcement to the heads of households, where there's 80 or 90 heads of households there, which is what we did by name. It was in the minutes, and it was in a written report that was read at all the parish heads of household meetings the following month. So we use the mechanism that we have to communicate with our people about everything. We use that mechanism to communicate with our people. So this is how we talk with our people. This is how we communicate. This is what we've done for many years in our church. And so when we had this important issue to deal with, this is how we communicated. This is what we did. Now, on the other end, and this is probably the most important thing, we had reason to believe that we had a very good idea of what kids were possible victims. All right, so we knew where he lived, we knew what his pattern of lifestyle was, we knew who he had contact with, and that sort of thing. So I'm pretty confident that we don't have some sinned against victim that we missed. I pray to God that we didn't. That was not the intention. We tried to do everything we could within our we used every tool in our toolbox to deal with the victims from the past that we knew about and to prevent any future victimization. But are we omniscient? Do we see it and anticipate it? No. I'm fully prepared to accept that there could have been ball drops or things that we missed, but it wasn't through any lack of trying to do the right thing sort of systematically.
Okay, thank you, Doug, for your reply. Now, Lee, I think that some of the issues that Keeley raised in her previous comments will lead us right into what you're asking, and she was talking about why women parishioners who were perhaps affected by their children weren't directly involved and told first, or at least told at an equal level with the men in the church. So that brings up the whole bigger issue of sort of like a patriarchal
gender role. Yeah.
So why don't you go ahead and frame your question then, Lee?
Well, I'm just looking for a comment, and I realize this isn't necessarily unique to Christ Church or any other institution, but that there is a culture where young girls should be sweet and subservient and obey men and perhaps even not fight back, and that might create an atmosphere where abuse can occur.
So what is the question exactly?
React to that.
Just react to that, okay?
Yeah, I actually agree with the assumption of the question. I do not believe that women ought to be I do not believe that Christian women ought to be taught to be subservient to men. I don't believe that's true. I don't believe that daughters ought to be taught to be subservient to other boys. I don't think that I don't believe that the Bible requires sort of an indiscriminate patriarchy where me Tarzan, you any given female, where you have men on a horizontal line here and women on a horizontal line beneath that. I don't believe that that's true. I think it's more like two vertical lines where for example, Queen Esther, when she marries the king of Persia, her status is far above that of a male hot dog vendor on the streets of Susa. So I don't believe in any kind of indiscriminate female subordination to that of the male. I repudiate that and deny it. And I'm not just denying it in the aftermath. I argue for this position in one of my books, Federal Husband. I believe that authority and submission in marriage of a wife to her husband and of daughters to their father is designed, I believe it's beautifully designed to prevent women from having to submit to men generally. So one of the things that cracks me up, quite honestly, about a lot of this talk about patriarchy and headship and submission is that the most independent, spirited women I know are connected to me by marriage and birth, and my mother and my sister and my wife and my daughters and my daughters-in-law, my daughter-in-law. So when I look at these women and I see people talking as though Christ Church teaches that any guy can walk up to any woman and say, "Do this for me," or "Go get me a cup of coffee." I'd frankly like to be there when they tried it. It just wouldn't fly. It's not that way.
I've met some of the spirited women in Doug's family, and I agree. Some of them are the ones I've met are just wonderful. Frankly, I can say that for virtually every woman I've ever met at Christ Church. Pity that none of them will ever be at a heads of household meeting. They'll never sit on the school board at Logos, and presumably they'll never become fighter pilots. You seem to have an animus against things like that. In fact, you've written that a nation defended by its women is a nation not worth defending. a little hard for me to, on the one hand, I agree that you have taught your daughters and taught them well, and that no daughter ever raised by Doug Wilson is going to just give it up for some guy because he says to. On the other hand, that's really not what we're talking about here. I don't believe that there's a culture at Christ Church that promotes child abuse, but I'm at a loss to explain why you have all these wonderful, spirited, intelligent, bright, active, deeply believing women whose gifts and talents you evidently aren't going to be able to use, and who at the very least were not invited to heads of household meetings so that they could, with their husbands, make wise decisions for the children that they birthed. That's what I object to.
Doug, you...
Sure. They're too smart to come to heads of household meetings.
Doesn't say much for the heads of households there.
That was a joke. This is the issue. And this goes to I think to the heart of our disagreement. I am not an egalitarian. I believe that there.
I guess, Lee, are you offline?
I think so.
I think so. Okay.
Egalitarianism means the view that in sexual issues that men and women are not only equal in the sight of God, which Keely and I would both agree with, but that they are also equal in their calling and design. So as a Trinitarian Christian, I believe that God the Father and God the Son, for example, are ontologically equal, to use the theological phrase. There's full equality. It says in Philippians 2, the Son did not consider his equality with God something to be grasped. So Jesus is equal to the Father. But in Christian theology, equality does not exclude submission. So when, in the 30 years of our marriage, there have been a handful of times, just a very handful of times, where a decision had to be made, and Nancy and I differed on whatever it was, and it came down to the wire. We had to make a decision, and where submission was an issue. There's just been a handful of times. And when that happens, I don't believe, and my wife does not believe, that when I make a decision and she says, and honey, whatever you decide, we're going to go for it, I'm going to back you up. That's what submission is. I don't believe that makes her in any way my inferior, in any way to be disrespected or looked down upon or patronized or anything like that. And this is something we actively teach our girls, our daughters. We wanted to model this in the community that we have. And thus far, and we're sinners like everybody else, but thus far, in the main, I'm very happy with how the husbands and brothers and fathers treat the women in their lives. Generally speaking, they are honored, respected, looked up to, their advice is sought out, their counsel is sought out. The point of having a heads of household meeting is not to say, now, don't you pretty little things worry about the business of the church. That's not the point. The point is to create a mechanism where husbands will go talk to their wives and talk to their children about the issues affecting the church, have interaction with them, get the input of their wife, and then bring it to the church. And so we don't believe that men should be there and women not. What we believe is households should be there, and individual men not, and individual women not. Okay. So women who are heads of households come to the meeting. It's not a gender thing. Okay.
Well, Doug, I had as I'm listening to your remarks, I'm kind of conceiving in my mind a chain of command, approach to the whole thing, that by the apparatus that you have established in your church, that somehow because wives are the wrong word. I'm going to use deferential, but I'm going to use it anyway. Wrong word. Take me to task.
Right.
But to their husbands and daughters are deferential to their fathers. That because that happens that way, it's not necessary for them to have to deal with the usurpations of power and authority from men outside the family. That's a very loose paraphrase of what you said, but that's kind of what I heard, and it sort of sounded like chain of command. I mean, I've been in situations where chain of command, and the fellows that worked for me never really had to suffer the wrath of the owner of the company, because I was the manager and I stood in between them. Mm-hmm. And I explained very clearly to the guys who worked for me, look, I get paid as the manager to take the flack from the SOB on top.
Right.
And if he comes to you directly, you come to me because I'm the intermediary, and that's why I get paid the bucks I get paid.
That's not the whole picture.
So, but that sounded a little bit like what you were saying, and if that's the case, that really is kind of a status arrangement whereby, or if sort of like an organizational chart. If you had an organizational chart, it sounds like men tend to gravitate to the top of the organizational chart. It sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there may be reciprocal caring, and there's no doubt about that, and reciprocal love, and it sounds like there's a whole lot of that within your own family.
Right.
But feudalism, there was a lot of reciprocal loyalties owed between the serfs and the masters, but I mean, is that ring true at all?
A part of it does. The part that rings true is the part that says you don't have to. When some bossy neighbor man comes up to my daughter and says, "I'm the male, you're the female, get me a cup of coffee," and she has the security and the right and the confidence to say, what are you talking about? I don't have to, I don't have to do that. I believe that if this is done right, it prevents women from being mistreated by men generally.
Okay, Doug, we're having the phone lines are going off the hook, so maybe we better try to get to a couple of these calls. If Keely, quick reply.
Yeah, I just want to respond and make 3 points. Doug surely knows that the eternal functional subordination of Jesus Christ in the Trinity has been considered a heresy for most of the 2 millennia of Christendom. When he says that households are represented at heads of household meetings, he's quite right. They're represented by men when there's a believing man available, not by women. And I would just want to end this with saying that there is no mediator between God and man but one, and that is the man Christ Jesus. My husband is not my priest. He's my best friend, my lover, my partner, and everything else. I submit to him gladly. I love submission. I think there should be a lot more of it, but he is not my intermediary.
Okay, thank you, Keely. Now we're going to go to line 1. You're on the air. Hello?
Yeah, actually, I think you're off the air. We can't hear you at all. We get nothing but static.
No, we're on the air.
Okay.
Hello? Hello? Oh, it must be a bad connection on that end. Okay. Huh. Well, someone else was also calling in on line 2, so if they want to call back, we don't have much time yet. Well, we have 6 minutes before we're off the air. And we didn't figure we'd last this long, did we?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll turn that off. Well, why don't we do this, since we have 6 minutes and we don't have the lights flashing at us right now. Why don't we go ahead and have some final remarks? And since Keely, you went first at the beginning, Doug, why don't you go ahead and just have take a few minutes out. Well, we got a phone call. What's your vote, guys? Phone call or?
No, I'm happy to take the call.
Sure.
Phone call. Okay. Okay, Radio Free Moscow, you're on the air.
Yeah, this is Rachel. I just had a question for Keely. I hear I just barely made the cut.
I'm glad to talk to you, Rachel.
Okay. Hi, Keely. I am Doug's other daughter, and I haven't had the pleasure of meeting you, but I would love to sometime.
I'd like that.
I just had a quick question for you on the whole gender role issue. What I have always been taught from my dad, mostly, and from my husband now, is that all of the women in our church have a place in the fight and in the battle. It's just that we're the archery division, while the men are maybe the fist fighters. We have a different role in the fight and different weapons. And so my question for you is really, can you see at all, or do you think at all that you might be the one saying that we are unequipped, when it's really all of the men in our church are saying, go fight, do what God has called you to do it well. And you're, when it comes down to sort of like, no, you have to fight just like the men.
No,
and
Rachel.
With their gifts.
No, Rachel, not at all. First of all, the Holy Spirit is the giver of gifts, not me. The Holy Spirit gives gifts, and there is no testimony in the New Testament that would rebut this, not on the basis of gender, but by his own good pleasure. If you have gifts that are, say, the fighting gifts, the archery gifts, use them, because you're going to be held accountable if you don't. If you don't have those gifts, they were given to you or not given to you, not on the basis of gender, but by how Jesus Christ wanted to build his church. Gifts should be the determining factor in how men and women serve in the church, and not gender. Thanks so much, Rachel. I hope to meet you soon, too.
Any final remarks, Doug?
Yes, I would say that I thought that Becca's earlier question was the finest question of the evening, but now now we have a tie.
Okay.
I just want to, I guess, reiterate what I think is the point of Rachel's question here is that we have a high view of our women. We have a high view of their abilities, their contributions. We believe that they do remarkable things that we cannot do. Our life would be dull and listless and awful without them. We honor them, and it's not a China doll on a pedestal kind of honoring either. We honor them actively. And ironically, the dishonoring of our women comes from outside our church. When people are saying these women are browbeaten, or they're more likely to be susceptible to sexual abuse, or they're more likely to be harassed, and that sort of thing, within our church, we think very highly of the women. We do honor them in practical ways, and we encourage one another. The women encourage the men in what they're called to do, and the men encourage the women in what they're called to do. And we do believe that there's a gender division that God lays out in His Word for what you're generally called to. In other words, we believe that God calls women to be archers and men to be the infantrymen. Generally speaking, there are exceptions here and there, Deborah and whatnot. But generally, that's how we take it.
Okay, Doug. Well, we're down to 2 minutes from turning into pumpkins or whatever here. So, as host of this program tonight, I want to thank both of you for giving us the time, and it's a long haul. That's 2.5 hours.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
it was wonderful.
And I'm hoping that maybe even down the road we'll have an opportunity. There's a lot of questions we didn't cover tonight. I think you both agree with that. And
the bottom line, just remember this: the bottom line is that we're not orcs or Klingons.
Well, I don't know what an orc or a Klingon is, but I'll tell you what: don't reject Jesus Christ because of my bad behavior or anyone else's. Jesus is really cool. People who do things in His name that aren't cool, those are the ones maybe you need to steer a wide berth around, and I hope never to be one of them.
Yeah, good point. Okay, and this is the Barefoot Elitist program, and we're going to close our show tonight, not only again with thank yous for Doug Wilson for showing up and giving us his time, and I'm having a tech come around here. Hi, Arlene. Oh, the studio is filling up with people with lots of anxious faces. And also Keeling and Marine Mix. So thank you both for coming. And we're going to play... All right.